So in order for Republicans to take back the Senate in 2024, they're going to have to flip the state of Ohio, and in doing so, need to beat Democratic incumbent Sherrod Brown. Now, Sherrod Brown is currently running for his fourth term. He's very popular among Ohio voters, so right off the bat, that presents an immediate challenge for Republicans in actually being able to defeat him. But we're going to take a look at some previous Ohio election results, trends, and ultimately analyze where this race is likely to end up in 2024 and under what circumstances Republicans could actually flip the state of Ohio and ultimately take back the U.S. Senate in 2024. So as always, before we begin, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So the state of Ohio has not been friendly turf for Democrats other than Sherrod Brown for over the past decade or so. I mean, you really have to go back to 2012 to find an instance where Democrats performed fairly well in the state of Ohio. You had Barack Obama win the state by around 2 percentage points, and of course, down ballot, Sherrod Brown win the state by around 5. Now, Sherrod Brown has always been a massive outperformer. Again, while Barack Obama won the state by 2, he ended up winning by 5. He outperformed by about 3 points, and he outperformed specifically in these rural areas in eastern and southern Ohio. And these are the exact parts of the state that have trended the most right in recent years. If we take a look at the 2020 election results, Donald Trump won Ohio by 8.1%. The largest shifts from 2016 to 2020 were in northeastern, eastern, and really central Ohio. You know, these are the parts of the state where Sherrod Brown tended to overperform the most, even more so than in Cuyahoga County, than in Franklin County, these other areas. You know, he didn't overperform that much in these urban and suburban counties. He outperformed the most in the rural areas. Again, take Columbia County, for example, a county where Romney won by around 13 percentage points. If we take a look at the Senate results, Sherrod Brown almost won this county. He only lost it by about 4. You can compare that, of course, to Franklin County, a 60-36 margin for Sherrod Brown. For Barack Obama, it was a 60-38 margin. So there really wasn't much of an overperformance in the urban areas. It was really the rural areas. And the rural parts of Ohio are going to be key to any Republican victory in 2024. If we take a look at 2022, for instance, and this was really the race that solidified, I think, to most analysts that Ohio is not a purple state anymore. Even if people hadn't realized after the 2020 election where Donald Trump won the state by basically the same margin while the rest of the country trended about 3 points more towards the left. If that wasn't a signal enough, I think 2022, a year where you had Republicans underperform, they were supposed to win the House by a pretty large margin. They were supposed to win the Senate as well. They lost the Senate. In fact, they net lost 1 seat as opposed to 2020. So they did worse in the Senate in 2022 than they did in 2020. And of course, they underperformed in the House. They won the House, but it was a very underwhelming margin, literally within the single digits. But in Ohio, you saw quite a bright spot for Republicans because while they did pretty poorly in other parts of the country, they were able to win the open Senate seat in Ohio by around 6 points with Republican nominee J.D. Vance against Tim Ryan, who really was the best Democrat that could have gone up against J.D. Vance. I mean, he was a representative in Northeast Ohio, the part of the state that had trended the most away from Democrats in the past couple of cycles. And as you'll see, J.D. Vance won these counties. He won Trumbull County, he won Mahoning County, he won Portage County. You know, just go back to Sherrod Brown's last margin of victory back in 2018. He won the state by around 7 percentage points. And he was able to win Portage County, Trumbull County, and Mahoning County. Mahoning County, he won by over 20 percentage points. These are counties that Donald Trump won sort of narrowly back in 2020. Again, if we pull up the 2020 results, he won Mahoning County by around 2 points. He won Portage by 12, and he won Trumbull County by 10. Of course, J.D. Vance sort of reflected those margins of victory. In fact, he did better in Mahoning County than Trump. He won it by around 4. Trumbull County, he won a little less than Donald Trump, I believe. He won it by around 8. And then Portage County, he ended up winning by 6 points instead of 12. So he underperformed in these areas, and despite that, still won these counties. And, you know, Ohio as a whole has trended pretty dramatically towards the right. Now, Ohio had always been sort of a center-right state. It always voted to the right of the nation. You know, Bush carried Ohio in 2000 and 2004. Obviously, the last Republican president before him, his father, Bush Sr., carried Ohio. Reagan, so on and so forth. Every Republican since Richard Nixon that's won Ohio has won the White House. But that status as a national bellwether no longer exists. Ohio is now a state that Republicans can usually count on, But Sherrod Brown is really the last obstacle to completely transforming Ohio into a solidly Republican state. Again, by margin, it votes for Republicans by around 8 points, at least presidentially, but down ballot, back in 2022, Republicans did very well. In fact, J.D. Vance was the worst performing Republican on the entire ticket. He only won this race by around 6 points, as I mentioned before, but other Republicans, such as Frank LaRose, Mike DeWine, they won Ohio by double digits, and they won it pretty dramatically. Governor DeWine won with 62.5% of the vote on the exact same ballot that J.D. Vance got 53%. So on and so forth. You go down the line. Yost, the auditor, Secretary of State, all of these races were essentially double-digit wins for Republicans. So it's not just the J.D. Vance type of Republicans that can win Ohio. General conservative Republicans can also win the state of Ohio. This rural shift away from the Democrats that really sort of accelerated after the presidency of Bill Clinton back in 1996, starting in 2000 with Bush, and accelerating again after Obama in 2012. Of course, we saw that in 2016 and 2020. Rural America has gotten much redder, and as a result, Ohio has gotten much redder since. A lot of these rural counties in Ohio have very sizable populations, and you look at other swing states where the rural areas don't really mean as much. Virginia, the rural areas are much smaller. One of the reasons why Virginia is a blue state and Ohio is a red state now, because those suburban areas in Ohio, even though they have trended more in the Democrats' direction in recent years, it's been totally discounted by Republicans' gains in the rural areas. So, taking a look at Sherrod Brown as a candidate, again, obviously he's going to win the nomination. Nobody's going to challenge Sherrod Brown. Now, what's interesting about Sherrod Brown is you would think a Democrat in a state that Republicans are winning by near double digits would be sort of a Manchin, a Sinema, sort of a centrist Democrat. But Sherrod Brown is arguably an optically progressive candidate, votes in line with the Democratic Party virtually 100% of the time, and yet still remains popular with Ohio voters because he does have that sort of working class aesthetic and working class vibe to him. And it's one of the reasons why he did so well in northeastern Ohio, one of these areas that trended so far away from Democrats really since the Obama years. Now, you could argue in 2018, these areas still hadn't fully transitioned from Democrat to Republican, and arguably Republicans can still lose these areas, no doubt. I mean, you saw it with Brown just a couple of years ago. These are pretty close counties, but when you consider the fact that the rest of the state, particularly the southern part of the state and the eastern part of the state, are much redder now. And again, if we look back at Sherrod Brown's victory map, both in 2012 and 2016, the areas he outperformed the most, northeastern Ohio and southern Ohio, those are areas where I think Republicans are going to do a lot better. So in order for Brown to win, he's really going to need to win back a lot of the rural support. He's going to have to win a decent number of Trump voters, because it's very likely, given Ohio's trends, that Trump will win the state of Ohio again. I don't think he's going to win it by as much as he did in 2020, but I still think it's going to be a 5 to 6 point margin. So Republicans probably really aren't going to have to worry about the state of Ohio, but in the Senate race, they certainly will, and I think they're going to be putting a lot of money into this, because, again, without Ohio, the path to a majority looks very difficult. If Brown's able to win Ohio, obviously, let's say Manchin wins as an auto flip, it's very likely that Tester could also hold on. Again, Montana's a bit bluer than a state like Ohio, but you have races in Montana where Donald Trump is winning the top-line ballot by around 18 points, and yet you have Democrats like Steve Bullock getting reelected by around 4 points. Now, all of Tester's races have been very close, but, obviously, he's still not DOA. He's not dead on arrival. These Democrats still have a fighting chance, especially given the prospect of a Trump-Biden rematch in 2024. Now, I think West Virginia is probably an auto flip. I think that's pretty safe to say. I don't even know if Manchin's going to be running again, but with Jim Justice running, this is easily going to be around a 20-point margin for the Republicans. Ohio and Montana really are toss-ups, at this point. And honestly, given partisan lean, I would give the advantage to the Republicans. But ultimately, this state really could go either way. Again, if Trump is winning the top of the ticket by only 5 points, it's very likely that Sherrod Brown could eke out a 2 or 3 point margin of victory, especially if he's winning places like Delaware County, if he's doing better in urban and suburban Ohio, and chipping away just enough of the rural vote in order to stop his Republican opponent from being able to carry the state at large. Again, I think with Trump on the ballot, it's going to be more difficult for Sherrod Brown. Any Republican on the ballot really is going to be more difficult. I mean, if you want to go back to 2012, Brown didn't overperform Obama by that much. He overperformed him by 3. So if we're going to take that same overperformance, and again, I don't think it's going to be the same overperformance, but let's say Trump wins Ohio by 5, Sherrod Brown would still lose Ohio by about 2 points. So, you know, obviously the closer Ohio gets on the presidential level, the harder it's going to be for Republicans to be able to win the Senate race here. Again, we didn't even talk about the candidates yet, but we've got a number of candidates that have already declared. Matt Dolan, who I think came in 2nd or 3rd. I can't remember if he came in 2nd or 3rd in the primary, but he was a very close contender back in Ohio. In fact, we can actually take a look at it right now. He was a very close contender for the nomination. Yeah, he came in 3rd, but he almost beat Josh Mandel. Very, very close race there. But, you know, Matt Dolan really came out of nowhere because a lot of people discounted Dolan. I think it was very much like a McCormick situation where you had sort of this more moderate Republican, not exactly the firebrand MAGA conservative, who wasn't really polling that highly, and then all of a sudden, right towards the end, has a bit of a surge and ends up massively overperforming during the primary. We also saw that again in Pennsylvania with McCormick. So I don't really know where this nomination is going to go. We've got a long ways away. You've got Warren Davidson, who, you know, he's really a favorite among MAGA. So is Bernie Moreno. And then, of course, you got Frank LaRose, who I think won by 20 points back in 2022. So you've got a number of Republicans that I think are very strong. Bernie Moreno, I don't think is strong. I think Matt Dolan would do a very good job against Sherrod Brown in the general. I think the real question with Dolan is more so his conservative credentials rather than can he win a Senate race in Ohio. I think he certainly could win. I think what a lot of Republican primary voters are going to be looking at, though, is who's the most conservative Republican that can actually beat Sherrod Brown. You know, Bernie Moreno, I think, is going to have a tough time, but somebody like Frank LaRose, maybe even Warren Davidson, I think they'd have a much better time against Sherrod Brown. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a like down below if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.